This video is going to introduce some of the things to keep in mind as you are beginning a unit on geometry in kindergarten. So when you're talking about shapes like circles, squares, rectangles, and triangles. I'm going to give you some big ideas that have to do with geometry in any grade. I'm going to talk about materials that you might use with kindergartners, and then also talk about a couple of tasks that you can do. So one of the first things that you want to know is that there's something called the Van Healy levels. The Van Heelys are a pair of researchers that studied how students learn geometrical ideas, and all students, no matter what grade level they're on, when they're learning a new geometry idea, something visual, they work their way through these Van Healy levels. It might not be a linear progression. They may go forward and then go back a little bit, but you can start to notice these levels within students' comments, and it'll help you know what to do next as you're listening to what they're thinking and saying. So when we are talking about kindergartners learning shapes, there's actually a level before the first level, which is kind of confusing. There's the pre-recognition level. So some of your students are going to come into kindergarten at this level where they just can't recognize any shapes yet, and that's okay. It's part of their learning progression. Level 0 is called the visualization level, and this is where you'll hear students say something like, if they see a triangle, they'll say something like, that looks like a roof. Or if they see a rectangle, they'll say, it looks like a door. And they're comparing it to things that they know, but they may not have a name or any way to describe the attributes or the characteristics of the shape. Then the level 1, which is where you want to move your kindergartners towards, is where they are able to talk about the properties or the attributes of a shape. So this is where a student could name a triangle as a triangle, but then also talk about why it's a triangle, because it has 3 vertices or because it has 3 straight sides. So know that it's not wrong for your student to be in any one of those, but by listening for those levels, you can move them towards the next one. The level 2, you might be saying, well, what's after that? There are more levels after that. The next one would be talking about the relationship between different sets of shapes, like the relationship between squares and rectangles, and how you can also name a square, a rectangle, and why. Kindergartners are not getting there yet. So you'll be working with students in the pre-recognition level, and then level 0 and level 1. The next thing that's important to keep in mind whenever you're learning about shapes is that there are 3 kinds of shapes. There are exemplars, there are variants, and then there are non-examples. And it's important for your students to see all of them. An exemplar is like the classic shape. When we talk about triangles, we see an exemplar being like an equilateral triangle where all sides are the same and the base is at the bottom of the piece of paper. That would be an equilateral triangle. An exemplar of a triangle, and the kind that you see in puzzles and shape books and on worksheets. But we need to make sure that our students see variants, which are things that are still triangles but don't look like that classic one. So you want to see ones that are tall and skinny, or you want to think about the orientation. Like, don't always just show a equilateral triangle with the point up. Show it to the side or even down like this. So it's important that we eventually expose our students to variants so that they don't start to get boxed into what they think a triangle or a circle or rectangle or anything might be. Also think about rectangles, making sure that you don't always see them horizontal or vertical. You need to see them at a slant and still see those as a rectangle. And then finally, it's important that you expose them to non-examples. Put out things that are triangles and not triangles, and then talk about why, how you know. And when you talk about why, that'll bring their attention toward the attributes. This task came from Teaching Student-Centered Mathematics, which is by Van de Waal and some other authors. To have anything by Van de Waal is a great place to get the background information about teaching a new topic. So the idea is that you would show multiple sets of cards. You probably wouldn't want to start with this many cards. This is a lot to start with. But you would ask your students, you could have different prompts, but I'm thinking that you would use these to say, I want you to sort these into triangles and not triangles. And for example, they might go like this. They might say that these are triangles and these are not triangles. Well, this isn't quite right. But you wouldn't jump into, oh, you've got that one wrong. That has 4 sides. It should be over here. Instead, you would say, okay, so tell me about why you put these over here in the not triangle side. And so this one, for example, they might say, well, it has these bumpy sides, right? So then what you're doing is saying, oh, so if that can't be a triangle because it doesn't have bumpy sides, you point out what attribute must be a quality of a triangle. So you'd say, oh, do you mean to say that a triangle has to have straight sides? And then maybe you could make an anchor chart that's recording the things that they're saying about a triangle. This one, they might say it has too many sides. It looks kind of like a lightning bolt. And so you might say, well, then how many sides are we expecting? And then that might get us to be able to talk about this one, because this one really has 4 sides. So this might take a week to eventually get these sorted down in the right spot, but as you're going through, it's helping them focus on the attributes, which is that level 1 of Van Healy. You want to get them to the point where they know that a triangle has 3 sides. Those sides have to be straight. They have 3 vertices, and they have to be pointy vertices. They can't be round, and they have to be closed. So this is a great one that is open, so they would see that the shape has to be closed. We also can't have anything that crosses or like hangs off on the end. That would not be a triangle either. In one of the things that I read in this awesome book, Learning and Teaching Early Math, which if you are wanting to know more about K1 and 2 math, this is a great book. It focuses on trajectories, which is like the order that kids learn things typically just because of developmental stages. They talked about how the circle is the easiest shape in general for kids to know, to identify, and then it moves to the square, and then typically students struggle with the triangle and the rectangle. And the teachers that came to me to ask about how should I get started with shapes said that before I even read it in the book. They were like, I had kids who ended last year and they couldn't tell the difference between a triangle and a rectangle. Well, that's what research says, and it's okay. And the way to kind of tackle that is by focusing on drawing their attention into the attributes. So that's what's happening here. And if you want a copy of these pictures, they are in that Van de Waal book that I noted, but you could also just search examples and non-examples of triangles and probably find some that were already made. And then the final thing is that you want to try to get kids to use their own vocabulary to describe those attributes or those characteristics of shapes. And they might use words that are not necessarily mathematical correct words. They might say, they might use edges when they really mean corners. They might say the pointy part when they really mean the vertex or the vertices. But you want them to try to develop the idea as much as they can, use their language to start, but then at some point when you feel like everybody in the room understands what we're talking about here, or most people at least, then I would strongly encourage you to go ahead and name it and use the correct math term. So, for example, vertex or vertices. And then later when they talk about it, I like to, if a kid says, oh, remember that one has 3 corners, then you might say, you're right, it does have 3 vertices. And even if they're not using the correct language, you're speaking the math terms back to them. So those are the 3 big ideas that I would try to keep in mind as I was going through the geometry unit with kindergartners and really with anybody. The Van Healy levels, looking for kids progressing through those, trying to use exemplar shapes, variants, and non-examples, and then drawing the ideas and the vocabulary out of them and then giving them the correct math vocabulary after they've developed the concept. So I want to quick run through some of the materials or manipulatives that you might use in a kindergarten class and really in any grade. The first are attribute blocks, and they might not come in this particular case, but the way the attribute blocks work, there are different shapes, there are different sizes, there are different colors, and there are different thicknesses. So within the triangles, there are 6 of them. The other one is put out for something else. There are 6 of them, and then there are 2 different thicknesses. So I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a thick one and a thin one. And then there are similar triangles that are smaller, also in thick and thin. So one great way that you can use these is a routine called same but different. So you might use, for example, these 2 shapes. We might start, let's go with this bigger one. We might go with these 2, and you might lay these down in front of students. It could be a small group or a whole group. You could draw it, you could project it on the board, but you might just say what's the same and what's different about these. Again, the point of that is that it's focusing them in on attributes. So here we might say they both have 4 sides. That's the same. They both have 4 vertices. That's the same. They both are thick. If we're looking at the pattern, the blocks, they both are red. They both are filled in. There's no holes in them. But then we talk about what's different. Well, this one's long and this one feels short. And the point is we're getting them to talk about it, to use those vocabulary words. There's a whole website called Same But Different Math that you can look up, and it has things to do with numbers and shapes and all kinds of stuff for all different grade levels. It's a great just prompt and kind of routine to practice with them. Okay, so that's attribute blocks. Angle legs are a resource that are often used in older grades, and they are these pieces that snap together with a little like hole there, and you can just let them play with them, or you can give them prompts and tasks to do. So you can snap them together, and it's important to note, kind of like Cuisinart rods, that the length of them is determined by or is sort of noted by the color. So these two red ones are the same color, these two purple ones are the same color. Later in upper grades, you can talk about angles changing, but there's all different sizes, and I just think they'd be fun to play with. I'm not sure what the fine motor capabilities would be with all kindergartners, but this is a cool tool to just have at a center, at a station, and let them play, and then talk about what they're creating. Next, you probably have both pattern blocks and plain shapes, and I just want you to notice that these are different. This plain shapes one that's all yellow, red, and green are going to be shapes that are the ones that they need to know in kindergarten: circle, rectangle, square, and triangle. The pattern blocks has other ones. It has a trapezoid and two rhombi. There's no reason to not let your students play with these, but if you're just developing the ideas, these have exemplar shapes, right? And then these are going to be other ones that are going to kind of extend our conversation and our descriptions a little bit. So you might want to start out with these. There's all kinds of tasks that you can do with those and exploration. One other kind of shape that you may have seen before are tangrams, and they come in 7 set pieces. They actually start out they can all be put back together as a square, and I really like tangrams. I mean, certainly we can talk about them from the point of view of what shape they are, identifying the shape, and it's a great thing. It's hard to see with my shirt, sorry. It's a great thing to talk about because of orientation and how is it still a triangle? Is it still a triangle all the way around? But these are also great for combining shapes. The side lengths of many of them are the same, so they're easy to put together, and it's a great just kind of puzzle putting things together. There are also several books, storybooks, that are about the tangrams that can be a cool cross-curricular connection. Then geoboards, I don't have one here, but geoboards are usually square and plastic and have pegs on them, and you can stretch rubber bands over the pegs. Again, I'm not so sure how well kindergartners can, their fine motor skills could deal with that, but it's worth a try, making different shapes, just experimenting with those. You might have some shape linking rings in your materials, and these are easy things to link together, but they are great to just do sorting. There are small ones and big ones, 4 different colors and 5 different shapes. Hexagons, triangles, rectangles, circles, squares. So those are maybe available in your building. Cuisinart rods are a fun tool, and all LCS buildings now should have some in the library or somewhere. And I would say just start by letting them play with them. What a fun thing to do on the first couple weeks of school. Just play, and then start to note what's happening. Are they naming shapes that they're building? And if they don't know the names of the shapes that they're building yet, then maybe talk about it. See what maybe you might need to give the name to them. But this is just a place to get started. Oh, look, I noticed you built a square with orange. Could you build a square with any other colors? What are all the different size squares that we could make? Those kinds of things. Let them play, and then you give them prompts out of what you're noticing that they are doing. Could you build a square with 2 different colors? Well, why or why not? That would be a fun thing to try. And then finally, in LCS, we have access to a bunch of stream toys and building tools that you can check out, and they can travel different buildings. So Gooby and Zoobs and Kiva planks are all different kinds of things that I think would be really interesting to bring into a kindergarten class. So maybe talk to your coach or your stream person or whoever that might be who can help you have access to those. So those are some materials that you might have access to, and now just a couple more tasks that you might want to try. We've already talked about the same but different. The next one is a shape hunt. I got this out of the Waal book, but I would suggest that you start small. Once maybe you have really cemented the idea of a circle or a square, you could say, we're going on a shape hunt. We're going to go to the library, and see if we can all find a square. And then maybe you would take clipboards and pencils and they could record what they found. Maybe you would take a picture with your phone, but just trying to look for them in other places. I would at first not say, let's look for all the shapes. We would just narrow it down into one that we're really focusing on. And then come back and talk about what you found and how you know it is or isn't that particular shape. I'd encourage you to check out your library. Just go to Destiny, do a search of your school library and see what kind of shape books there are. Ours had over 100 things pop up when I searched it. So there are tons of great ways to do those connections to literacy. The Feely box is kind of cool. You would make a box much cooler than this one, but have a box, put a hole in it, ask them. You might have some shapes laid out on your table like this. I'll put these so you can see them. And then you would say, stick your hand in the box and feel it, and then see which one of these shapes down here you think is in the box. So I'm feeling it. Oh, I felt it. And if they don't know, you might say, well, what do you feel? I feel 3 pointy parts. And then we'd look down here and see which one had 3 pointy parts. It must match this one. Let's see if it is. It is. It's the triangle. So you could put different shapes in there and have them practice describing in a small group, in front of the whole group, whatever. Next is Guess My Rule, and I have these cool Venn diagram circles, but you could just make a circle with a piece of string or something on the table, and you would say to them, we're going to play a game, and I'm going to put some things in the circle that match my rule, and then I'm going to put things outside of the circle that don't match my rule. So I might start by putting this one here, and I'm going to say, oh, that one goes out. That one does not match my rule. Let's see, this one does match my rule. This one does not match my rule. So at this point, you want them to start thinking about what the rule might be. And I'm wondering if you are thinking about what the rule could be that these make and these don't, okay? And then you might say, let's do one you can see better. Does this one, where should this one go? Should it go in? Or should it go out? Well, it really depends on what my rule is. If my rule has 4 sides, then this should go here. But if my rule is it's a square and all the sides are congruent, then it would go out here. So you can start to have those really good conversations about specific attributes of shapes. And then finally, one I saw in the Clement Sensorama Learning Trajectories book was called a shape step. And they suggested you use tape on the floor and make a bunch of different shapes. I think it would be way easier and maybe even more fun to go outside on the sidewalk and draw lots and lots of different shapes that match the 4 that we're learning, maybe more if your class is ready for it, and then have them point to a kid and say, you're going to go all the way down the sidewalk, but you can only step on circles. And then they'd have to hop from circle to circle. And then the next kid might say, you're going to only step on triangles. And they try to step on all the triangles. And you could leave it out there for the whole day and let all of your kindergarten classes go through it. So I think that could be a fun activity once they have a good grasp of all 4 of the shapes. And you could even differentiate by giving kids ones, if they don't know triangle yet, give them all the circle, the ones that they might be able to find. So those are some ideas that might get you started thinking about shapes in kindergarten. Hope this was helpful, and reach out to me if you have any questions or some other great ideas to share.